And now I can show the slide. Okay, appreciate everyone coming out today. We're going to be having a workshop and learning all about mapping key internal assets with Gary David from Bentley University. Gary's been a real great compadre in helping with learning and teaching around customer experience. And he's a full-time on that, as well as a sociologist. So that's a kind of unique perspective and fits right into customer experience. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you guys to Gary David.
Thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate being here. Appreciate people making the time today to hang out, and totally fine to have your cameras off. You can have them on. That's totally no pressure. Now, as I'll talk about, if you are not able to put your microphone on, that's totally fine. There'll be opportunities to also engage in the chat box as well. So a few different means and methods of connecting and communicating as part of this. I've been teaching online now for a little while, before the pandemic and also during the pandemic. I'm pretty flexible in terms of how y'all want to engage in the content. So no problems there. Let me pull up my title slide. 1 second here. Let me switch screens. It's pulling up on the wrong screen that I wanted. So I'm gonna have to change that. Slideshow, close off that, because I can't see you. I can see the slides unless I turn it over this way. 1 second here, I apologize. They put this screen over there. Now I can see that. And now I can share my screen and make sure this is all working. So can everyone see my screen?
You should.
Perfect, thanks so much.
Yes, I
2
can.
monitors, no waiting, always getting the right composition of what monitors where, for sure. So today I want to talk about, do a workshop in, there's opportunity for people to engage as well. It's not just going to be me talking on this idea of what I call assets inventories. And I have to admit, it's not my idea, as we'll talk about. It's an idea that I first learned about when I was working at an organization called United Way Community Services back in the 1990s, when I was doing my PhD in Wayne State University in Detroit. And I was able to attend this workshop on assets-based community development. And this idea has stuck with me for a while as I've done teaching and research and workplaces and professions. And I work at a private business school. I'll mention that in a second. It always stuck with me that one of the things that is essential to building communities and to building, to developing organizations is by identifying the gifts that people bring with them every single day. And so this is where this idea of assets inventories come from. This is actually the first time I'm giving this as a workshop. So really excited about people's feedback. You get to be guinea pigs. I apologize in advance. But I think that we're going to have content necessary to give you some tools, right, to take with you to utilize in your own spaces as well. And quick shout out to CX Boston. I will be giving a keynote into CX Boston. I'm located outside of Boston, so it's a quick trip, depending on traffic, down to Boston itself from where I live. So I do want to give thanks. I appreciate the opportunity by Mark to give this workshop and also to give a keynote at CX Boston. And it is a little weird, I guess, for a sociologist to be around, except for the fact that I should say my dissertation work was on intercultural communication between Arab liquor store owners and primarily African-American customers. So I was studying customer experience before I knew there was a thing called customer experience. We were just calling it service encounters back then. And I have a long record of actually studying interactions in contentious environments, which we can talk about a little bit as well. But before I get to all of that, I also want to encourage people to use the chat box liberally. You don't have to use a chat box to ask questions. You can use the chat box to actually chat and to just kind of talk about what it is that's being discussed or presented. And doesn't mean you have to agree. If there's any disagreements, questions, challenges, by all means, put it in chat. If you want to exchange recipes, put it in chat. I always like my students and people that attend my workshops to use chat as freely as possible, just to create more of a sense of community and engagement. I live stream on Twitch 3 times a week. Twice a week, I live stream sociological content. I actually was just live streaming this morning. We were talking about Patriots Day and Tax Day on Twitch. So borrowing a little bit from Twitch, which is not just a gaming environment, it's also a communication environment and an educational environment. By all means, feel free to use chat for sharing whatever you'd like to share. And a little bit more about me. I am a professor of sociology and experience design at Bentley University, which is a private business school just outside of Boston. I've been there since 1999. This is coming up, starting my 23rd year, I guess it is, at Bentley University. I teach both sociology and I teach in our graduate program of user experience. I also teach a MBA class on employee experience. And finally, I just developed an undergraduate course on introduction to experience design. So the niche I've carved out for myself at Bentley, which is a great place to carve niches out, is this intersection between arts and sciences and business. And so a lot of the work I do is trying to bring those worlds together, is bring what we know from the social sciences, psychology, sociology, anthropology, and I have backgrounds in all three, into the business space, especially the experiential space, the interaction space, the perception space. I also co-host Experience by Design podcast, where we chat with people who work in areas of experience design. I see Diane is in the participant space, and Diane was on the podcast. So hi, Diane. So if anybody's interested in experience design, make sure to check that out. I also do a professional speaking and training operation, which this first thing is based on. So what you're getting today is, as you'll see, the first pillar of this connecting disconnections framework. I also do professional speaking on DEI and belonging topics. I was one of the team that created the first of its kind in the country DEI major. So Bentley University has a DEI major to train professionals looking to work in DEI spaces. And by all we can tell, it's the first such major of its kind anywhere in the United States. So that's pretty cool. And I also do consulting work through ethnoanalytics. So enough about me. And I do want to make this as interactive as possible. You don't want to listen to me talk the entire time, neither do I. So we'll have a number of exercises and question prompts. Well, we'll work on how to develop these inventory tools and how to develop applications that you can take back to your workplace, whether it's a place you work or an organizations you work with, how to bring this idea of inventorying assets and accepting gifts back into the workspace. I think it's a really important concept, not just for organizational development, but also for human acceptance, for human development. One of the things I talk about employee experience meaning is employee experience is about optimizing the organization for the employee and not just optimizing the employee for the organization. So how do we make better organizations for people to be at? And I do firmly believe that accepting gifts, appreciating what people bring with them is the first part of that. Just to give me a sense of who you all are, real quick, if I could start, have people just introduce who they are, where you work and where you're located, and what we would like to learn today, so I can make sure to hit on those points. That will be great. And I'm actually going to start with, if you're available, Adila. Is that how you say your name?
Hi, yes, this is Angela.
Adila, sorry. I got the wrong emphasis and the wrong syllable. I apologize.
Nice to meet you. I work at Pulte Group, and I work on our customer experience innovation team.
Fantastic. And is there anything you're looking to get out of this today in particular that I need to make sure that I hit on?
I don't think so. I'm currently tuning in while possibly working as well. So it's nice to kind of catch up on some best practice as I'm continuing on. I know some of the stuff that we're working on is a lot of, cross-functional delivery.
Right.
So any type of best practice there is helpful for sure.
Fantastic. And if folks want to lurk while they're working and listen, that's why I don't think we're going to break into groups, because I don't want to put anybody on the spot who's not prepared to be. So lurking and listening, totally fine. I understand how that goes. Totally appreciate that you took any time to be here at all. Lorraine.
Yeah, hi everybody, Lorraine Schumacher. I'm from Kentucky, but I'm actually in Atlanta. So hopefully those of you that are down here for tomorrow, I will see you tomorrow. I'm an executive advisor and really looking to help you remind me of what things to bring out of my tool belt. Sometimes after you've been doing this for such a long period of time, you forget what you've already learned. So I'm looking for you to remind me of that and potentially give me some new things I can add to my toolbox.
Great. We'll definitely try to do that. Thank you so much. Angela.
Good afternoon. I'm Angela Ward and I work with it's actually a professional services firm, but I just took an internal role for client experience is new for us. So this is very new for me. I've done a lot with employee experience, so I'm hoping a lot of it transfers and just looking to absorb and learn as much as I can from all of you.
Fantastic. Hi, Brett. How are you?
Doing well, Gary. How are you?
Brett and I know each other, so that's why I said that's why I talked to Brett that way.
It's good to connect with you again. It's been a while.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear what you have to say to. Oh, let me start with me. So my name is Brett Sharp. I lead customer experience for Aquarium, one of the sponsors for the event here in Atlanta. I live in Atlanta, and so I'm looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. And what I'm excited about is Gary David presents some of the most fascinating information by bringing a different perspective to the CX industry. And so, Gary, specifically, I'm kind of hoping that on the employee engagement piece, maybe even into CX and change management, how do those all kind of come together in terms of kind of building that community and really having the organization be prepared to handle and communicate those three things?
Yeah, you're talking my language, Brett. So we will talk about this idea of integrating experiences for sure, and how to tie it all together related to customer experience too.
That's perfect.
Phaedra.
Hi, I'm Phaedra Ruffalo. I'm recently relocated to Atlanta to help out my mom, but I am from the food manufacturing innovation space. I was in food manufacturing, ingredients, and then most recently, I was for nonprofit, a commodity board. I have recently created my own consulting firm to help businesses in the food space to not only get their products to market, but to understand why and how they're going about it. And so really excited to be here to just continue building my toolbox.
Great. Well, the food industry is just a fascinating space, so I appreciate it. Really interesting stuff. David, go ahead.
Hi, this is David Hentz. I'm based in Atlanta. I'm the CX leader for the telecom technology business unit here at NCR, and just taking full benefit of the whole CX event that's going on today and tomorrow. This is an area I'm not as familiar with, so I'm interested to learning more.
Great, thank you so much. Hey, Diane, you there?
Yes, I am.
How you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm here, Diane Majors, and I am on my own advisory company, helping CX leaders. And I came because Gary David's one of the most brilliant people I know. So,
Oh,
yeah.
Thanks. We'll make sure to give you my mom's phone number later so you can remind her of that.
She deserves all the thanks, all right? She's the one
Right, she does.
in there.
Patty,
Good to
go
see
ahead.
you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Patty Soltis. I am the principal analyst of customer experience at a company called Insider Intelligence, an eMarketer. And I am excited to be here today to learn more about the sociological pieces inside of CX, because I think a lot of times we forget that CX is about emotions, behavior, values, things like that. So I'm excited to learn more about that.
Well, I appreciate the interest in sociology. It's plenty to bring into the space, especially when you talk about systems and integration of different parts of a larger ecosystem. So I appreciate that. Let's see, we have Russ.
Hi, I'm Russ Edwards. I am a CX research lead for Siemens, and I am based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm just looking forward to learning a little bit more about, quite literally, mapping key internal assets.
Great, thanks so much. And Sandra.
Good afternoon. I work for the city of Olathe, which is in the Kansas City Metro.
Oh, okay.
I am excited to be here. I'm pretty new to customer experience. We recently did a reorganization in our city and a 20-year plan, which CX is really the foundation of our plan. So really just trying to go from being a system support person to being CX and learning all that it entails, and then trying to get people who are civil servants to get on board with CX, because like we don't get to attract customers. They just have to be our customer because they
Right.
live here.
Right.
So I'm really trying to let them know that CX isn't just external, it's also internal. So just learning how to win people over who really think our citizens are content. Why are we changing stuff?
Right.
So just trying to learn all of that and just get to know other insiders and see if there's any other government people around and just get good tips.
Fantastic, and especially on the community development piece. There might, and I'm happy to chat about this with anybody after the event's over, but especially on the community development piece, there might be some useful takeaways, and I'll make some reference to the community development piece and how that started and what impact that had. So you might be able to take some of that back to your city. Mark, I think you're the last one left.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you.
Hey, it's Mark Abbas. I am the Director of Marketing for Pinnacle Propane out of Dallas, Texas. I'm actually in Atlanta and Woodstock. And this is my second week on the job. So I'm learning a lot about the propane and energy industry. But it's essentially a utility, a commodity that really any company in that needs to differentiate on customer experience. And so we have the charge to create a customer-centric culture and really implement customer experience management as a key differentiator, value creator, and way that we can compete sustainably. And, I've got voice of customer experience, all of that kind of within my purview, partnering with others in the organization and taking that forward. So it's not always, obviously, it's probably rarely in the marketing function, I would say, as far as my experience goes, but excited to really connect that with, the brand promise, and customer experience is going to be a big part of that. So it's going to be a fun journey, as they say.
Absolutely. I think we got everybody. When people talk, their names jump on that participant list. Did I miss anybody? If I did, I apologize. I think we got everyone. We'll say we got everyone, and if I missed anybody, I'm sorry. But
Some
yeah,
may come late too, but
some may come late.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's dive in. So there's going to be three big ideas here that we're going to be talking about. Okay. The first big idea is that organizations can do a better job at identifying and accepting the gifts that employees bring with them every single day. And this kind of a big idea, but it's also one where we wonder about, like, why don't we do this already as organizations? And I often think about my own experiences within my school, which I love the place I go to school. It's fantastic. But at the same time, I see a lot of opportunities missed because they don't identify and elevate the things that people know how to do well, and also link people's aspirations with opportunity. And because of that, there is this created disconnection. So organizations can do a better job at identifying and accepting these gifts. The second big idea is that community building happens the best when it builds on the assets and gifts already present in a community. We'll talk about a little bit this assets-based model versus a needs-based model. And most community development and even organizational development happens from a needs-based model. That needs-based model includes what's missing and what needs to be brought in versus what do we already have, and how can we utilize and deploy that for organizational development and professional development of the people internally. So that's the second big one. Rather than looking at things from what's missing or that half of the glass that's half empty, let's focus on what we have and what's half full. The third big idea, by better incorporating employee gifts and organizational assets together, we can start to build workplace communities. One of my big pushes is what I call workplace community development and even virtual workplace community development. I've studied how communities get developed. I've studied how virtual communities get developed. And this idea of turning workplaces into communities, which I'm a sociologist, I am by nature pessimistic and cynical, but looking at that we can build places that feel community-based. We can build connections between people within that community. Geography doesn't make community. Connection makes community. That's an important piece. Identity makes community. In other workshops I do on how to build workplace community, I talk more about what makes a community a community. You can live next door to a neighbor and not feel connected to them. You can sit next to somebody at work and not feel connected to them, right? And so how do we make these connections possible? So those are the three big ideas. And I want to start at any point, if anybody has a question, you can feel free to either put it in the chat or a comment, put it in the chat. You can also raise your hand. I'll be monitoring both. And we can stop along the way. We have a small enough group that we can keep this really interactive. So let's start with this thing called the Great Resignation. Okay, you've all heard of it, I am assuming. People have been talking about why is it that people are leaving work at higher and higher numbers, and what is it going to take to keep them around? And so the first question, and again, feel free to raise your hand or in chat. We don't have to go through everybody, but what have you observed? I'm curious. What have you observed at your organization or profession in terms of the Great Resignation? I don't always believe what I read in the papers. Usually, if it bleeds, it leads. So there can be some sensationalism going on. Are you seeing this Great Resignation event as a real thing that's impacting your organizations? Or is it something that you're not seeing very much? And if you are seeing it, how is it impacting what it is you're doing and how it is you're planning? I know that Sandra, you said you're developing a 20-year plan. Is it impacting your company's ability to long-term plan and to think in any terms of stability, because there's no stability with people leaving and the inability to bring new people in?
So Gary, this is Brett.
Hey, Brett.
I felt bad because they were silent. So what I'll say.
Well, one of the things you learn, Brett, is that if you leave the silence long enough as a professor,
they'll join in, right?
Someone will jump in.
Yeah. So I wanted to say we've experienced a little bit of it. From the Great Resignation, what I'd say is it's been that people that were kind of on the fence have really had better opportunities that are now presenting to them than what they've seen in the past. And I think that's a big one for a lot of people, especially that want purely remote work. So I think that's kind of changed how we look at how we run our business and what our benefits are for employees from the remote perspective.
Yeah, I just typed something in chat. What makes for a better opportunity? You said remote work as an option is a better opportunity. So this question of opportunity, right, and employee experience and designing for the employee, being employee-centric or even human-centric, is a factor, right, that we're going to be talking about here. Sandra said if someone leaves, the new person is hired at the same or usually a better rate. My personal opinion is that we have lost sight of why we do our jobs. And Sandra, if you want to expand on that, either in chat or any way else, I think it's a fascinating thing about, a transactional mindset, which might be, they pay me so I work.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly
versus,
that.
Some kind of value-based mindset.
Yeah, I think that from what I've seen in my personal opinion is that helping the customer is less important than making more than the new person, or that they're asked to do too much. And it's very hard to get buy-in to give the customer a good experience, and also delineate what's the difference between customer experience and customer service. It's really kind of a muddy area in our city as well. So those are things that we struggle with.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just typed in, if our relationship is purely transactional, I'll stay as long as it is profitable or convenient or worthwhile. There's a great line from the movie Office Space that if you pay somebody enough, if they pay somebody a certain amount of money, they'll work just hard enough not to get fired. I mean, something like that, right? I mean, if all our relationship is built around is transaction, not judging that, but if that's what it's based around, then that's what you're going to get. The margin between staying and leaving might be this tipping point, like Brett was talking about, which is I can work from home someplace else. And usually we talk about, like, you know, sociology of work and occupations. There are different factors. There's pay, convenience, opportunity, enticements, benefits. All these things kind of work together. But increasingly people are talking about mission, right? Is the organization purpose-driven, mission-driven? Does it allow me growth, not just in my current professional role, but as a person? And employee experience often can be about growth as a person, even to the point where leaving an organization, if it's the best opportunity, is the best thing for the organization, because then you can also create employee ambassadors who rave about they were trained so well at company X that they got opportunities at company Y. Mark saying the companies that recognize that work is only one and much smaller part of a person's life, and who give and who they are than the other parts, giving people the flexibility to be who they are, which might involve different work hours, for different people, for example. Absolutely. And thanks everyone for sharing all of that, because what we are finding is that it's not just about the money, right? You know, it's not just pay that's driving the Great Resignation. Research that's being done around this question, and this is from Gallup, 42% of the reasons people are quitting are tied to how they feel about their bosses and organizational cultures, 42%. And low engagement is specifically experienced when workers conclude they aren't growing, appreciated, or treated with care and respect. They aren't growing, appreciated, or treated with care and respect. And I highlighted those for the reason that we're talking directly about appreciating people, and appreciating them, not just, you know, giving them at a boy or girl or person, but do we value what they're bringing with them on a daily basis? This literally just came out yesterday or 2 days ago on my Instagram feed. And so I included it here because I'm like, this is actually pretty perfect. To boost retention, invest in employee development, from this publication called Harvard Business Review. For those who don't know, Harvard's a school outside of Boston, in the Boston area. And they have this quote right here: there's one lever leaders can pull that's highly accessible, doesn't have to be expensive, and gives employees something they really want: meaningful development. One of the things we'll be talking about here is that what I'm proposing is not expensive, doesn't cost anything. And the payoff on it is huge. That accepting the gifts that people bring with them doesn't require any more sunk cost necessarily, doesn't require extensive reorganization. What it requires is taking the time to inventory and to identify, to be aware of those gifts, those capabilities, those competencies that people have. In this was an Instagram feed. They also talked about 86% of employees say they would change jobs if a new company offered them more opportunity for development. Employees who get this professional development opportunities are 15% more engaged, have 34% higher retention than those who don't. 94% of employees would stay at a company longer if it invested in their career development. So, I mean, it's pretty clear that what we know about people at work is that they need opportunities to not just do their job, but to feel that they are able to contribute meaningfully and grow in their roles, as well as feel appreciated for the skills they bring. These are central or essential parts of their employee experience. And just, you know, to underline the connection, you can't expect people to do well by their customers if they don't feel that they're being done well by their employers. It's a pretty hard lift to ask them to elevate the customer experience when they feel like their experience is coming at the expense of it. How do you address this when the big boss leader has the mentality of it's not personal, it's just a job? Well, Sandra, that's a tough one. How do we solve for leadership that's, I won't say bad, but not aligned with these kinds of values. I do think that, thinking from if I was going to take an example here of community organizing or community development and use middle managers as this kind of the person on the community organizer on the ground, you can create environments of engagement and connection, even when the leadership is not in step with this idea, right? And this is where, rather than, one of the things I say to my MBA students, if you call people managers, they will, right? If you call them organizers, community developers, facilitators, I mean, in what ways are we training middle management in a way to make these things possible? People talk about leadership a lot in organizations, and leadership's important at the top level. But I also see leadership, the ability of people at the middle level, not just top down or bottom up, but middle out organizing, middle out engagement is where organizations are made. It's that middle piece where there's a lot of potential. And so I don't know that there's a magic answer for that, but I do think we can create the opportunities by first establishing awareness, and again, giving people the tools like this, like the tools we're talking about today, to inventory assets, to identify capabilities and competencies, and to build around those things versus looking at the deficits or the absences that might exist. And if other people want to answer Sandra's question in chat, give some other advice, by all means, feel free to do so. Let's get some knowledge sharing going in the chat as well. Another slide, not mine. This is from joshburn.com. Their development of a 4-level of healthy organization maturity model. And that the 4th level, healthy organization, strategic, holistic view of well-being embedded in culture, focus on work, workers, and the organization, active leadership support. Maybe not what Sandra is talking about, obviously, because there's not active leadership support. Healthy work barriers removed, recognition of performance, opportunities for collaboration and growth, focus on equity and accessibility. I mean, right now, level 2 is kind of table stakes, where, or even table 1 is regulation stakes, employee safety. Level 2 is kind of table stakes. Level 3 and 4 is where organizations are starting to try to compete around experience. The problem is most companies that are surveyed are not level 4 companies and barely level 3 companies, okay? And these levels start to get into the importance of making connections at the workplace. How do we tie people together? How do we de-silo our organizations? How do you align mission and purpose with work, or vice versa, align mission to work, to aspirations, to attitudes as well? And one of the things that I've tried to build on in creating this framework that I developed, that we're getting one piece of today, is how can we make breakthroughs in our work and our thinking by making connections between parts of our organization's environments and ideas that are disconnected. So this whole framework that we're talking about here, this connecting disconnections framework I'll talk about, and the assets piece I'll focus on, is about connecting parts that are disconnected. Innovation comes from connection. Ideas come from making connections. Insight comes from making connections. The more we can make connections, the more possibilities we have to achieve whatever it is we're trying to accomplish. And when those connections are done within a culture of purpose and support, then there's great things that are possible. Even when there's not this leadership support, this aspirational vision, these connections can still help. That we, as human beings, we all want to feel connected. We were just talking about this before we started with the pandemic and being remote. People want to feel connected. They want to feel appreciated. They want to feel in touch with somebody else. How in organizations do we make this possible? I created this framework called Connecting Disconnections. You can hear more about it at garyconnects.com. It's part of my professional speaking operation, where I talk about each of these parts, and I talk about the whole thing all together, of assets, barriers, connectivity, deployment, and evaluation, A, B, C, D, E. And today we're going to be focusing on this assets piece. How to connect disconnections by inventorying assets first. And so let's talk a little bit about gift giving and acceptance. So we'll get interactive here in a second. That was kind of the prelude to whatever it is that you are going to learn about today. Now, again, this should come with a trigger warning, but I'll ask the question, can you relate a time when your excitement to give a gift was not matched by the recipient? If you've ever, even just put like a green check mark in the participant window, if you've ever had a time where you were really excited to give somebody something, and when they got it, their level of enthusiasm did not match the level of enthusiasm and anticipation that you had. Phaedra is saying, yep. Diane saying yes. And if anybody wants to share any of that, by all means. I mean, we just had Easter. My kids got gifts from the Easter Bunny, of course. And, they're just kind of like, yeah, okay, thanks. And nothing's worse than on Christmas Day when you come downstairs and all of the gifts are just ripped through like a pack of hyenas, right? And there's like shredded paper and carcasses of cardboard and packaging all over the place. And the kids then turn to you and go, is that all? Is there anything else? Is that it? And you're just, well, I put months into this. I carefully saved. I looked for specials and deals. I anticipated when something was going to be available. I fought hordes to get it on sale. And then the morning comes, the great reveal, and the kids are going, it's all right. It's all right. Sandra, all the time? All the time. I'm sorry, Sandra. Is there anything you want to share with the group? You don't have to.
No, I'm just saying that I always tell people, like, I make the Kool-Aid. I don't just drink the Kool-Aid. I make the Kool-Aid. Like, this is amazing.
Right.
So most people are like, really? I have to touch a glass? Like, do you have a straw? Like, it's never good enough.
It's never good enough. I mean, like, did you hear the people on QVC talk about how great it was? I mean, maybe we should give the reviews with it. Be like, everybody likes it. Why are you like this? I think there's an opportunity there, Sandra, to package gifts with the reviews so that there can be more peer pressure in acceptance. Maybe that's something we can work on together after this is done.
Hey, Gary.
Yep.
Can I throw something out?
Sure.
Because feedback is a gift that is not always appreciated.
Amen to that, right?
Yeah. So there have been many times in my career, especially when I was managing people, where feedback was shared, because your job is not always to tell people what they want to hear, but what they need to hear. And there's a nice way to do that and an appropriate way to do that, and so on and so forth. But even through the years that I worked in consulting, there were many times where people did not necessarily want to hear what it was that I had to say, but feedback is a gift.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? The question of what do you think of this is a dangerous one. If my wife asked me, what do you think of this? And she's showing me like new clothing and how it looks on her, feedback needs to be evaluated differently as a practice than if it's an employee at an organization. Or what do you think of this report? What do you think about this job? What do you think about, how I did here? Yeah, it's a great point that feedback is a gift if we're only willing to accept it. And that goes back to the very point of, do we accept gifts that are given to us? Are we able to appreciate gifts that, when they're presented to us? It's such a great point. And I want to share this one situation of when a gift wasn't accepted by somebody. And it's a short clip that comes from Australian TV. Let me know if you cannot hear this. The audio should be shared.
Yeah,
Is that okay?
I just got a special girl here tonight. I've been.
Oh, we're going to get her up too. What's her name?
Catherine.
Catherine, come up. Yeah.
Catherine,
Catherine's got to stand right there. She's a good sort. Cheers. Yeah. That's what I thought.
Oh.
Talk about punching above your own weight.
Yeah, we've been together about 3 years now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I want to sort of go the next step. So
Which is?
asking her to be my wife.
I'll hold that for you, mate. Hang on, wait. All right. Big loud voice.
Catherine, will you make me the happiest man on earth and be my wife? Just say yes. Say yes. And
That hasn't gone that well. No.
I told my mum to record it. Well, call Dad, make sure he doesn't record it.
All right, we'll do that. And good on you, mate. Didn't go that well, but hopefully it comes out for you, mate, and goes good. All right, we'll go to a break and come.
Yeah, I think the words it didn't go that well are perhaps the understatement of the century when you're looking at something like this. And when I was looking at examples of people that were doing proposals, and public proposals is now a thing, I guess. When I proposed to my wife, I made sure that we were isolated in the woods someplace where there could be no chance for embarrassment. It might have been a long car ride home, but at least there were going to be no witnesses. And this situation where this person is coming to give this gift, and we've all had this experience of gifts that we have given not being appreciated or accepted. I don't know how it turned out for them. I didn't follow up and try to see if it all turned out well in the end, but we know the feeling, right? Whether it's feedback, whether it's an actual gift for the holidays, whether it's a proposal of some kind, whether a marriage proposal or a business proposal, right? That feeling of not being appreciated and accepted can be really damaging and really difficult. When our gifts, especially in the form of our talents and abilities, are not accepted, then we can feel detached and disengaged from the relationship, much like this gentleman probably was after that moment. And whether the relationship was with another person or with the organization with which we work or for which we work. And so one of the things in an assets inventory that we want to think about and start talking about is, if we were going to do a personal assets inventory for ourselves, how might we talk about ourselves in the following ways? What kind of professional and occupational skills do we have? What kind of personal hobbies and activities do we have? What are the individual characteristics that we possess that we think are most valuable, that we think are most beneficial or helpful? What social networks do we exist in? What kinds of connections do we have just in our regular lives? What kind of learning aspirations do we have as well? What would we like to learn how to do, whether it be work-related or hobby-based? One of the things, and Mark will know about this, one of the things that happened a lot during the pandemic was that guitar sales went through the roof. And I don't know if Mark's listening, but Mark, you can say if this, you've heard about this,
yes.
where
Oh, yes.
guitar sales were sold a ton, right?
They sure did.
Why is that?
Oh, people are taking up new hobbies and they're kind of bored, I guess.
And people were fulfilling that dream of always wanting to do something, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This was going to be the time. I want to learn something.
It's good break, right?
It's a good break. And the idea of trying to do this kind of inventory, and these are important points to keep in mind. And if we had more people and more time, we might take this time to do it ourselves. But what would this list look like if we did it for all of ourselves? The skills we have. What skills do we have that people don't even appreciate or understand? What things do we do in the workplace that go beyond the job description, but become essential to the work that I do? One of the exercises I do when I'm doing research in organizations is I'll present a job description to somebody that's supposed to reflect their job. And I'll ask them, tell me what's missing from this job description in terms of the work you actually have to do to make your job successful. And really starting to identify those pieces that they bring that, because they're not in the job description, probably aren't going to be part of any evaluation as well. So the evaluation approach that companies can use for looking at workplace performance, if they're linked to job description, may not get at those skills that are required for success, but aren't accounted for in the evaluation. So thinking about for some of us, this might be really difficult because we have a hard time giving us credit for any of these things, right? But thinking about the skills that we have that are underappreciated or not recognized. Thinking about the hobbies and activities that people don't know we have that we engage in. Think about what characteristics we possess, whether it might be I'm able to give feedback, or being friendly, or, you know, I'm more of an introverted kind of person personally. I know people who are extroverts, right? Both can be an asset based upon the context in which the person might find themselves in. So doing a personal inventory to understand all the gifts we have to bring can start with a list like this. And by using this kind of list with employees, as we'll talk about more, we might start to uncover those tacit gifts that aren't explicit that might be crucial building blocks that we can use to not only engage them more and allow them to feel more recognized, but also give us more creative opportunity to connect that gift set with challenges that we're trying to face. Let me pause there for a second. Any questions, comments, thoughts, reactions to what I'm kind of laying out here in terms of a personal assets inventory? The gifts that we bring with us. What gifts do we possess individually that we might bring to the workplace on a daily basis? Is it making sense for folks? Impression check here, just really quick.
Yeah, this is Phaedra. I love this. I mean, especially when I've gone into new companies and had to take over legacy teams, and some were a lot harder to get on board than others. Right. I think it's a great approach to kind of, build that trust. I mean, that's the key, is like, I've gone into some organizations where the culture is pretty fractured, and, trying to rebuild that trust, but that also has to be helpful with leadership too, trying to rebuild that trust. But I like this, this asset inventory as a stepping stone.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Phaedra. And I'm thanks for sharing that story, that example. And, one might think about when we onboard people, right? Do we get this? When we look at a resume, it tells us some part of this, but are we really tapping into all of this? One of the nice things about working in an office together is that the personal hobbies and activities we might get a sense of. So what'd you do this weekend? And so through just everyday conversation in the workplace, we can surface some of this material. And it might, using, people that are good in sales might already do this and might use a CRM in this way, might make a list of what activities or hobbies people have, but what ways can we do this as a regular part of our business function?
Dave, Gary, I have a question here on that. So, when you're trying to categorize people, right? Like for instance, I would say some people, different people, different times a day. I mean, I have a problem with personas because of that, right? Mm-hmm. I tend to do more mission-based focus of stuff rather than personality-based. Now, when I think about people and their intentions also, I think come into play, which may fit in somewhere in the learning aspirations or characteristics, but I'm thinking in terms of, do you have a personal mission? What's really important to you in your work and in your life? Maybe that can be also one of the assets.
Absolutely. And I'm typing something in the chat that comes out of sociology. If I remember correctly, it's called the 20 statements test. And it just goes, I am blank. Okay. And then there's 1 through 20 on the left-hand side, and people are asked to fill out whatever comes to mind first. And it's a test of what we would call identity salience. And it comes from the University of Iowa School of Sociology, of Social Psychology, Symbolic Interactionism, doesn't matter. Anyway, but it gets into who we are as people, what's salient, and even at different times. And so you could modify that kind of test of, when I first come to work, I am blank. When I am operating best, I am blank, right? You can give different possible scenarios that might give you a sense mark of how people are different selves at different times. And, absolutely, I've taught classes on identity and social identity. And the idea of self-changing in context is fundamental. Absolutely fundamental, not only in how we're categorized, but how we see ourselves, right? On the weekends, I'm a dad. During the week, I'm a teacher. When I'm live streaming, I'm a streamer, I'm a content creator, I'm a runner, whatever, right?
Exactly.
And think about when we talk to people the first time, we often try to do an assets inventory. So what do you like to do? Where do well, where do you work? Or, then we start to try to find connection where we can engage around some kind of topic. And so trying to formalize this and playing with this is like, there's no one way of doing this, I don't think, to kind of fill in those kinds of ideas that Mark, you were talking about, makes a lot of sense. Going into this question of gift giving and community building, just to talk about this, and we don't have to go through this because I just want to kind of pose this. If you had to list all the positive attributes of the community in which you live, what would that list include? Just kind of think about it a little bit as I go through these following slides. Where we live, right? People say, like, what do you like about living there? What's good about where you're located? What are all the positive attributes of the town, of the city, of the community in which you live? What might that list include? And that idea of developing a list of things that are good in a community comes from this: building communities from the inside out. John Kretzmann and John McKnight, or Jody Kretzmann and John McKnight. I took this workshop back 1996-ish, maybe 7, with John McKnight. And they developed the Assets-Based Community Development Institute. It's at Northwestern University. This book was first published in 1993. And the focus of this book, and it's more like a workbook, so it's not like a thick academic book. The focus is not on what is missing in a community, but rather what gifts a community already possesses. And originally I'm from Detroit, right? Or I'm from just outside Detroit. And Detroit, when you tell people you're from Detroit, it's never, oh, I've heard that's wonderful. What a great place. Oh yeah, the culture, the art, the music, the industry, the people. No, that's not what I hear usually. What I usually hear is, God, Detroit. Did you ever get carjacked, or, anybody who got murdered, or whatever, right? It's like, isn't that the murder? Isn't the most dangerous city in the country, or all this negative stuff? And being from Detroit, we're kind of used to it. And then we will talk about all the positive stuff that exists, right? The music, the culture, the arts, not so much the weather. It's okay in the summer, I guess. But all these other things, a sense of community, the sense of identity, the sense of entrepreneurialism, the history of immigration, all these great things. And if you focus on the positive or negative, it's not just a question of how we frame it, although it's that too, it's what we identify. If I ask you to tell me what's wrong, you'll give me a list of what's wrong. If I ask you to tell me what's right, you'll give me a list of, or what's good, you'll give me that list. And so the ABCD Institute was focused on the assets. And there's this quote right here: communities can only be built by focusing on the strengths and capacities of the citizens who call that community home. Those who have escaped the lures of deficiency, therefore, have been drawing upon a new map based on old truths, an assets map. At the center of the map and of the community building process lie the gifts of individual residents, their knowledge, skills, resources, values, and commitments. Escape the lures of deficiency and drawing upon a new map based on old truths, an asset map, the gifts of individual residents. And I just have simply taken this approach of ABCD and said, how do we use this for the organization? How do we treat people in the organization for their gifts, for their talents, for their resources, for their values, going back to your point, Mark, for their commitments, for what matters to them. Not just in a, here's a survey way that we often deal with through employee engagement efforts, but in a real fundamental connected way. A needs-based model in a community would look something like this, where you look at the things that are wrong: unemployment, child abuse, crime, welfare, dropouts, illiteracy, gangs, truancy, lead poisoning. And when we talk about community development, usually have a bunch of social scientists or civic officials who come into a place and look at all that's wrong. And as a sociologist, we teach classes all the time on social problems, criminal justice, deviance, right? All the negative stuff. So, as a social science, we are often geared towards what's wrong. But what about this? What about over here on the right side, an assets-based model? The gifts of individuals, the associations that exist among citizens, and also the institutions that exist within a community. And by looking at the assets, we can then think about how we connect all of these different pieces together in ways that are traditional and ways that might be unique as well. How do we approach what we can call a stakeholder model, where everybody is part of the process, that elderly aren't over here as disconnected elements because of their needs? They actually have something to contribute, that people who might be labeled a certain way aren't marginalized because of those labels, but that label might contain an asset that is essential. You think about in organizations right now around topics like neurodiversity, for instance. Rather than focusing on the limitations of a person because of some kind of neurological functioning type, one might look at the advantages or the opportunities that the traits associated with that neurological functioning type might present. And even when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not just inclusion for the sake of being inclusive, although that's nice. It's also inclusion to create connection, because it's through that kind of connection that you can create belonging, because now people are having their gifts appreciated and engaged with. As an example, there was this community outside of Minneapolis that began with a community talent inventory in order to identify entrepreneurial skills within the community, what people knew how to do, and to build relationships among community members, that the effort itself was an act of connection. And through this effort, which used community associations and institutions, Mercado Central got established, made up of 35 businesses from the community that generated over $2 million in first-year sales. And this was in a community that had high unemployment, prostitution, gang activity, crime, drug use, etc. If all you did was try to treat the negatives, you would never build on the positives. So rather than just treating the negatives, the idea is to identify the positives and then build on them. And so just to take a second here, if we had to think about all the positive attributes of a community in which you live, after talking about this, how has that list grown? And it could be, you might live in a place where, might be challenged in any number of ways, socially, economically, in terms of crime and deviance and behavior, roads and all these other things. And those things are real. But what are the positive things that exist that can be used and leveraged to then build the community? Not just to feel lucky, right? It could always be worse, but to use those assets, to use those gifts, to use those resources as a foundation to deal with the gaps, with the challenges that exist. So that's a big chunk there. Let me pause there for a second, get people's thoughts, reactions about making community inventory lists, things that you appreciate about where you live, and also ideas this might be starting to trigger in your own minds around how we conceptualize community spaces and how we think about those spaces, whether in terms of assets or needs. Any thoughts from anybody in chat or raising hands or anything I can make clearer that I didn't explain adequately? Or is it a lot to take in so far?
You know, it's interesting. I've when I think about just, you know, daily living, right? I'm kind of, it's kind of weird. I've been happy to not have to lock my door for years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's just the security or the feeling I have of, and it might be a false sense of security, frankly, but I feel okay with that. And I love hearing nature around me.
Right.
I would say that's not really people, but it's a safety, a sense of that. It's not necessarily people, it's the environment.
Well, it's interesting, Mark, and those are great examples, actually. The idea of, I mean, it was funny, it reminds me of a story when I was going to college at Central Michigan University, and I was like going to a 7-Eleven with somebody, and I was driving, and we got out of the car and I locked the doors. And the person said, "Why are you locking the doors? We're just running in." And I just went, "Detroit, remember?" I mean, like, you know, this is just what we did automatically, right? And so that, you know, the idea of not locking the door, I still think about that there are times when, you know, I see like one of my front doors unlocked and I don't lock it. Now, part of it is I have 2 dogs, one that's 95 pounds, but another part of it is like where I live, I feel pretty secure. And there's a moment of gratitude, right? With that, or listening to the spring peepers, because there's a pond outside my house, in front of my house. Those are all, you know, gifts. I mean, to me, they are. Some people, I had a student one time who was from the Bronx. She's like, "Yeah, I can't stand listening to nothing. It freaks me out. She needs traffic outside of her window." But that's the sound of home. You know, what does home sound like to you? What does home feel like to you?
It's the environment as much as the people, I guess, is where I'm coming from. If I look at people, I've got a maintenance fellow who comes over and takes care of everything, right? And that's great. I love that.
Right.
But it's the location. It's easy to get in and out, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, all that's going to be very different for different people. And this is not an absolute list with, you know, that we're making judgments, but it's a sense of like, what is it that matters? And Mark is saying the connections people have outside the company into the larger community can be as powerful, amen, as internal connections, but does represent a bigger community. Guess I think about that because I'm a marketing guy and those connections are gift. Absolutely. I mean, absolutely, right? I mean, this idea of what connections do we have? What spaces do we exist in? If you're trying to penetrate a certain market, right? Well, do you know people in your company that already live in that market? Whether it be around a certain product or whether it be around a certain geography, right? And can we utilize them? Because they would probably be happy to be asked if someone asked. You know, how often at work have you felt like if someone would just ask me to do this, I would be happy to do it. But since no one asks, you know, bleep them, right? I mean, I don't want to be vulgar about it. Maybe bleep is not vulgar, but you get my point, right? You have developed a strong reaction because no one asks. I mean, I get this all the time. And this is why this goes into this idea of assets-based community development for the enterprise. This is my term. You know, because I needed A, B, C, D, I needed an E. So I said enterprise, and then bam. Marketing, am I right, Mark? Gotta have the branding, trademark Gary David. And then ask this question: in what ways does your organization capture employee gifts, if any? Not any gifts, everybody has gifts, but does your organization do anything to capture gifts? Do you feel your organization does a good job accepting the gifts that employees bring? I mean, you don't have to answer that question. It's kind of a personal one. I don't want anybody to out their organizations. I'll speak for me, right? I work at a great school. I can tell you how great it is. And, you know, if you said your kids wanted to go there, fine. David, I see you unmuted. Do you want to say anything?
Well, when I hear that statement or the question, do you feel like your organization does a good job accepting employee gifts? My mind went in many different directions on that statement. One is companies hire people to solve problems, right? Or fill a gap, whatever it is. We hire these people and then they don't perform, right? For whatever reason, but yet, and I think that's the old way of looking at hiring. I think there's a new thing bubbling up where people are hiring for talent, but then that changes the dynamics of the I don't know, transaction or relationship, because before a company was looking to, like I said, to hire someone for a specific reason. Now companies are hiring what you think is for a specific reason, but then you get in and right away they want to move you to a different spot that you didn't even interview for. So I don't know, I'm just throwing out ideas here. So you know, what I'm saying. So we all have precious resources, and and I know we all have our own talents, but our talents are looking for a home, and companies don't really have the time to find you a home when they have a problem they need to solve.
Yeah, you make me think of two things, and I appreciate that. The first thing is it starts to sound like the way in which colleges create classes. I mean, colleges don't accept students, they create a class. And that class is a composite of different traits, features, talents, skills, abilities that they're trying to have on their campus. And, absolutely grades is part of that. You have to be able, to do the grades, but that's only one part of that, right? And so I wonder if companies are, doing what, as you're describing, approaching it more of a composite kind of thing of we're looking for a employee population that looks like this with these different traits, competencies, abilities, experiences, whatever it is. And it sounds like, it's shifting a little bit. I would say the second thing is part of this, connecting disconnections that I talk about is how to use these assets then creatively to overcome the barriers you're looking to overcome. And so there's a linear way of I have this problem, I need to hire these skills. Then there is more of an innovative, creative way, which is I have this problem. How do I leverage the skills that I have available in creative arrangements to deal with that problem? And so I'm thinking about in those ways. And the example I give when I talk about the barriers piece, which I'm not talking about here, it's part of the larger framework. If you remember the movie Apollo 13, if you've seen that movie, they had to create this, they had to fit a round filter into a square space. And they just dumped everything on the table and said, this is what we got to work with. Now we need to assemble it to make it work. Here's our problem. We're limited in the ability of getting a new filter up to this module, but here's what we have to work with. How do we put it together in a way that will work? That they were working with an assets-based model. This is what we have. These are the resources available. This is what we have to do with it. How can we creatively use these assets to overcome this barrier?
I think when I hear you say that, it's a good example. I think in the work world that I'm in, or maybe others as well, this kind of thinking comes across as organizational kind of flavor to me, and it works in a strategic time frame where we take a pause from the day-to-day grind and the speed. I mean, the speed of change in the last 2 years, it's caught a lot of people flat-footed.
Right.
And so we're hearing it too, career development. Hey, we got to keep the lights on.
Sure. Yeah.
And we got people all over the world, and I don't know, it's just this sounds like a lot of heavy lifting in a fast-paced environment, and so it almost comes across as only and don't take this offense, but more of a strategic conversation, like to think about how you might want to be in 2 or 3 years versus a kind of a leadership day-to-day kind of thinking.
Well,
I don't know.
let's get through it. It's definitely a leadership day-to-day kind of thinking, right? I mean, because as a person who has done this kind of work and who's an ethnographer of cultures and organizations, I can go into a place and relatively quickly do an inventory, at some base level, right? I mean, and there are tools here available. I'm happy to make the PowerPoint available for anybody. So I say, this is how you can operationalize this. And so in an organization, I see your comment there, Brett, I'll get to it in a sec. A needs-based model in an organization might be, what skills is the organization missing, right? What are the error defect rates in production? How many staff are needed, are missing in a project? Who do we need to hire? To what extent are employees not engaged? What consulting areas do we need to bring in? As a person who does consulting, I'm all in favor of the 5th bullet. But, right, these are the things we're missing and that we need to fill. An assets-based model might include these other things. What types of clubs, associations do people belong to? What types of hobbies do people have? What kinds of interests or learning aspirations do people have? What kinds of accomplishments outside of work do people have? What physical spaces do we have that we can work with? What community environment exists around the company environment? Now, using a business example here, Zappos was very huge on this idea of we need to make collisions in the workplace. The way in which we're able to succeed on a daily basis as a company and to excel beyond our competitors is not by doing the things that everyone else is doing, but doing them faster, cheaper, commoditizing whatever it is we're delivering. But it's through making connections in ways that allow us to develop insight into these areas and beyond. And one of the chief challenges of businesses is to innovate when they're trying to dedicate all of their time to whatever the main product is that keeps the lights on. We just aired a podcast, An Experience by Design, where the guest worked at Boeing and was talking about this very thing. He's actually in the Atlanta area, Andy McDowell, and he was very much talking about his job was to try to lead innovation and insight and opportunity. And they were like, well, why do we need to do that? We're one of 2 airplane manufacturers in the world. We got the market captured, and then, the max happens. And, the thing about this kind of model is keeping, the grind aspect of work is sustainable to a point, but as we're seeing now with the Great Resignation, people are opting out of that when they do feel more disconnected. And I saw that Brett said, I love this idea, but it's a big topic and feels aspirational. Well, I mean, I think it's a little, if I was going to push back a little bit, the idea of appreciating people as being aspirational says a lot about the state of business, quite frankly, and why the Great Resignation might be as great as it is. The idea of, as part of a business process, working in ways of identifying the skills and traits and aptitudes of individuals, and then leveraging those back into the organization as resources, right? That would be an exceptional part of business, not a routine part of business, does get to this transactional nature of business. In the CX world, we do this in a very small and tactical way when we conduct stakeholder mapping or create CX advocacy network. Sure, absolutely. Yeah, Mark, and Mark, but Brett, it's very similar in that kind of mapping effort, or stakeholder mapping as well. I see a comment from Adela. I think approach was helpful in my past consulting career when we would look to staff projects. There were people that were SMEs, and then sometimes things that were hobbies would become relevant for a specific client, and that would be thought of in staffing. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that example. I appreciate it, because absolutely right. I mean, and not that you would leverage all of this anytime, but if we have, whether it's an internal CRM of sorts, okay, where we know things about our people that help us to make connection with them, and then connect that with other parts of our business, that's free resource, right? That doesn't cost anything in terms of bringing someone from the outside in. That's just better leveraging what's inside in order to make those connections, which, as we talked about originally, that feeling of disconnectedness is one of the big drivers of this thing called the Great Resignation. And so in thinking about this, and I know we're coming up, in 10 minutes here, I think we can go a little bit over. When developing a assets-based inventory, one of the questions to ask is, what are we hoping to achieve? What's our goal? What specific goals can we name that will help make the general goal more concrete? What kinds of questions might we want to focus on and identify in order to generate the kind of information necessary to meet both the general and specific goals that we're trying to accomplish? And how will we use the information that we collect to accomplish our goals? And how do we think about, and I'm going to give a business example of this from a call center in a second to actually embed this into how I did this in an organization. How do we think about what assets we have in an organization, in people that we have, whatever attributes or aspects of them we want to identify? What are the organizational assets we possess? What are the physical assets we possess? As was mentioned earlier, the community-based assets that we possess, that we might have as well. Partners in supply chain. There's actually a great story about Market Basket in the Boston area where there was a big fight between the family members at the board level over who was going to run the company. And Market Basket's a very big grocery store chain in New England. And because one of the favored people was being pushed out by his relatives, the supply chain basically stopped. I mean, they kept some supply going, but they did it in such a paced way as it actually negatively impacted the company. Customers boycotted the store in support of one of the brothers, the CEO, against the other family. It's a tremendous story about how these larger assets, the community, the customers, the supply chain, the people in the organization, how the one leader, Arthur Demoulas, because he was able to develop people internally, he got to know them individually. They moved through the organization, how they became very committed to the organization in such a way that the customers became so committed to the idea of the organization that when there was a hostile takeover attempted, the place basically shut down. And I don't know that you can give me an example of customers acting in that way at a board level where they literally shut the place down. But it goes into all of these assets that exist within that space. And so getting into the final parts of this, we start to think about the individual attributes that people have, the types of groups that exist, the general characteristics of employees. You think about employee resource groups, ERGs. I don't know if people have those in their organization, but that's one kind of way of identifying assets and using those assets to create greater connection, which can then be re-leveraged back into the organization on a daily basis. The kind of physical environment that an organization has. Can that physical environment be linked to the community at all in any kind of way to create space that could be used? In what kind of capacity? Just as a very simple example, we have a Bose building not too far from my house. During this coming weekend, the Boy Scouts are having their electronics recycling event in their parking lot. I don't see that as a small thing. I see it as a pretty important thing about community engagement. Can that be extended further steps? Is that relationship developed further to who are the people running that event in the Boy Scout side? Who are they working for and engaged with? Can there be further connections made between the company and that community association to really, at least on the one hand, create that connection, which that connection could then in the future be used for problem solving or for opportunity development. So let's talk about a practical thing here of this is all kind of, people said aspirational and how do we do this? Well, here's one example. And I'll start with this quote from The Customer Comes Second. Happiness in the workplace is a strategic advantage. Services comes from the heart and people who feel cared for will care more. Services comes from the heart and people who feel cared for will care more. It's a really interesting book if people haven't seen it. And so I was on a consulting project with someone who many of you know named Megan Burns, who's here in the Boston area as well. And I was brought in as just doing qualitative research on this larger journey mapping project for this client. And in conversations with the senior VP, who is now the CEO of the company, it was related to me that they're having a really hard time in their contact center. These are all incoming calls, servicing problems or questions from their customers. And so in talking with the senior vice president at the time, who was in charge of the contact center, it became clear to me that the contact center was based around a needs-based model. There was a formalized training that the call center representatives had to adhere to, right? They had to hit on this script and these points. And that when they were evaluated by their managers, they were evaluated not for the things they did well, but for the things they did wrong. I mean, does this sound familiar to anybody in terms of a model? That the contact center training program that existed was not based on the skills and knowledge or assets that the contact center workers already had. It was based on an external model that someone brought in and said, this is what you need to do. This is going to, this is the gap that we're filling with this model. And the idea of the approach we started to develop was, rather than having managers focus on deficiencies in the calls, the idea was to focus on the assets. What were the employees doing well, even if it violated the script? What were they doing that made sense? How were they able to manage difficult conversations in ways that made the experience better for the customer? And how was it hearably better for the customer? That beyond, a survey score, but you could listen to the phone call and get a sense of what was going on in that conversation. And so what I did was I listened to a lot of different phone calls from employees, and I was looking for their competencies and their skills. And then when I developed the training program, I replayed the calls that I listened to, or some of the calls, to the employees and asked them to analyze the calls. Tell me why you did this here. What were you thinking when this happened, right? When you were approaching this situation, what caused you to do it this way? And so we were capturing the competencies that people had. We were capturing their gifts, their skills, their knowledge, their know-how. And then building that back into the training program to turn their tacit strategies into explicit and trainable skills. That was the framework. Not here's what you should be doing, but here's what you're already doing well, and let's really identify it. And so after doing that, we created a training program that really was theirs. They could identify with, that they saw themselves in, and they felt more appreciated. We also reduced the number of standardized responses they had to give. One of the challenging things about these phone calls was, even when they didn't help a customer with their problem, they always had to end the phone call with, is there anything else I can help you with today? Now, when you didn't get your first thing done, right? When you called in for a problem and that wasn't solved, the last thing you want to do is say to a customer, is there anything else I can help you with today? And when I asked the employees, the call center workers, the contact center workers, I'm like, why did you ask this question? They're like, we hate asking that question. But if we don't ask that question, then we get scored down. Well, what would you say if you had the choice? Well, I would say something like this. Okay, well, let's work with that. So this was a fairly straightforward, not aspirational, not strategic planning, but already using the existing management and oversight structure, evaluation structure that existed, but refocusing it on assets and skills versus needs and gaps. And so if we're thinking about ways that we could capture competencies of people in an organization, what tools could be used, right? Well, could you use if you have quarterly conversations, if you have weekly check-ins, if you have people who are listening to customer calls, if you have other kinds of meetings, if there is a survey that's already going out to people, is there a way of adding some elements to it? If there are ERGs, employee research groups, that already exist, is there a way of better mapping that out and thinking about how to integrate those together and align them more with the actual doing of work. So they're not viewed as separate outside activities, but they're viewed as internal resources that can be deployed. And so a lot of what we're talking about here is not necessarily creating new work, although there can be some of that, but it's rather rethinking how it is we're doing our existing work. Whether we're focusing on the needs, the absences, the shortcomings, or whether we're also not necessarily ignoring those, but we're also incorporating the assets, the capabilities, the competencies, and the skill sets that people already have, even within the existing structure. And I do have over on my website under the white papers, ethnographic interviewing for competency capture. I did this with another company on their sales team. And the senior vice president of sales said, I can tell you who is the best salesperson. I have no idea why. Not a clue what they're doing. I mean, our numbers show who's the best salesperson, but I don't know what they're doing. We're thinking about doing a survey. I'm like, don't do a survey. Let's talk about how we can do an interview that's fun for them to engage in and also identifies their skills and competencies that we can then use as part of a training for new people. So how do we do that knowledge capture and then build it back into a training structure when people come in who are new? So that was that project. And then conscious conversations and deliberate dialogue program. That is the white paper that exists for the call center or contact center program that I did. Didn't take a huge amount of time, right, to do that kind of engagement. And it didn't take 2 or 3 years. It was just refocusing what it is that we're able to be aware of, and then making that the focus versus the negative be the focus. And then if anybody wants to know more about the other pillars of how to turn those assets to overcome barriers, increasing connectivity, deploying ideas, and then evaluating outcomes through measures that matter, there's more information and content around what that means right here. So with that, I'll stop sharing, and any feedback, questions, comments, thoughts, love to hear from what anybody has.
Yeah, feel free to turn on your cameras. Now would be a good time for that. We're going to conclude shortly. So if you have anything else to add or questions, go ahead and jump on in.
This is Mark Abbas. I'd say a lot of this content and this approach really is important to be very collaborative with HR and work closely with the HR team to maximize the talent that is brought into the company. You know, you have talent, people have skills, but then motivating them, engaging them, that's the other part for them to achieve their full potential. And I'm curious as to how, you know, CX leaders have partnered with HR teams and senior leadership to really make this work.
Great question. Yeah, I don't have a firm answer on that. And this goes to this larger point about, I was just on Experience Live on Friday, and we were talking about integrated experience design and a systems thinking. And so the idea of aligning employee experience with customer experience with user experience, I teach in a UX program, and often UX, especially now, can be about confusing the person so they don't know where to unsubscribe, which is not a CX value necessarily. And I don't know to what extent people are collaborating. I don't think companies have an experience strategy. I think that they often have compartmentalized strategies that don't integrate together. But Mark or anybody else, I'd be curious what their thoughts are.
You know, I think it's really critical, especially these assets. I mean, there's also some stuff that may even be private, right? Yeah, or it needs to be concerning privacy, especially overseas, that they don't want to share certain information, right? You know, overseas a lot stricter about that stuff than they are here in the States. But I would think you have to deal with HR side of life for sure on that. I know that when we were doing mystery shopping and things years ago, we were always dealing with operations and HR side versus marketing side. And so I think sort of getting an idea of what those assets are and and having those categories, you can easily identify, hey, this person really likes this kind of thing. Let's make sure they're on it versus this person really hates that. Why make them do it?
Right. Well, it was funny. One of the things that I was working with a software development teams that are distributed right from the United States, India, and Ireland. And they had gone through all this cultural training program, right, which was not great. And my background is in intercultural communication. And usually these cultural training programs are built around difference, right, the negative. That you're like this, they're like this, now work together. And you're no way similar, now work together. And people go like, I can't imagine why we can't connect. And so one of the things that I suggested the company do is like, sports is a common, not everyone, but it's common. It's a common feature for people to come together around, right? Did you see the game? What'd you think about this? I said, but people in India and the United States don't share a common sports reference point. So why don't you get your employees, why don't you get the Indian employees, see if there's any volunteers who would be willing to put on a brown bag lunch session to explain cricket to Americans? And could the Americans put together a brown bag lunch session to explain baseball or football to Indian workers? I mean, again, what's the cost there? What's the lift? I mean, not much. It's sports. We're not talking about who did you vote for. It's like, what are the three things called with the two things on top, and how does a cricket match actually operate? That kind of thing, right? That's an asset. Passion about sports. They know about cricket. They know about baseball. All right, let's do a cultural exchange. It's much better than talking about the caste system, which may or may not have any relevance whatsoever to what challenges they're facing in the workplace. And we published a paper on that last point. And so even, simple things like that, again, doesn't take a lot, can leverage, as Mark said, the passions that people have. That's not going to make HR antsy because they're talking about sports, right? And it's a way of getting people together by leaning into a distinction that people can come together around under a larger category of sports.
That's a great one. It's so objective. It's not going to be emotional for most people.
No, not at all. I mean, and even the Irish people too, because I'm like, yeah, I've talked to the Irish lead of the site, and he's like, yeah, we came to Boston. They took us to a baseball game. Did you know what was going on? Not at all. Did anybody try to explain to you? Nope. It's like, so that's just like one of those things. I mean, it's nice to take them to a baseball game, but like, what if the Irish team explained Irish hurling or whatever they wanted to? You could let them pick, right? Whatever it was, and then let them own it and let them develop something simple for it, like a brown bag, and get together and then see what happens. Because I watch cricket and because I know about cricket, it's been pretty amazing when I'm talking to people from India. If I just mention cricket, there's like, oh my God, not everybody, again, I'm not stereotyping, but it tends to be a popular activity. And I'm able to kind of just converse and dialogue, and difference melts away because now we're aligning around something that's shared. There's a shift in identity, and it's shifting that identity allows us to connect differently than if we focus on the differences we might have.
I love it. Love it. Anyone else have any other comments or thoughts to share today? Otherwise, we're going to close it up and take a little break before our 3:00 session, which is with Greg Kilstrom. He's going to be talking about how to, more with your experience, but essentially it's going to be a good discussion. Then we'll have some networking following right after that. So any other comments, thoughts?
And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, I just gave my work email. So you just want to contact me by. I have like 5 emails. The FBI probably thinks I have multiple identities.
One more thing is save the chat. If you'd like to save the chat, because there's some really good thoughts in there.
Yep.
Then go down to where you type in things. There's 3 dots. Click on those 3 dots. First word should say save chat. So if you will, go ahead and save the chat, and that way you can see some of these thoughts or share them later, as well as anyone else putting their emails in. You can do that. Do it now because I'll be shutting this down very soon. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here.